Hey guys, my name is Rob, and today we're reviewing the PowerA OPS V3. This is a wireless controller that is being marketed as a PC and cloud gaming controller, which essentially means it's compatible with PC and also Android and iOS via Bluetooth. PowerA is a US-based company who specializes in controllers and accessories, and you've probably seen budget controllers from them at local stores such as Best Buy, GameStop, and even Walmart. This controller is part of their recently released OPS line of controllers, which is an acronym for Overpowered Series. The OPS V3 in particular has many of the features common in more premium controllers, which is why it's also a bit more premiumly priced at $100. PowerA simultaneously launched the OPS V1, which is a very similar wireless controller for half the price, but it is missing several features of the V3, which we'll go over. Don't ask me why there's a V1 and V3 but no V2, because I have literally no idea. Regardless, I opted for the V3, so we're going to open it up, test it out, and see just how overpowered it actually is. Not that you should judge electronics based on the packaging, but this graphic on the inner box looks pretty cool. It wraps all the way around as well. I'm not sure how much of the $100 price tag is invested in the presentation here, but regardless, I like it. And the graphics on the inside as well. On top here, we've got the user manual. And then we have a braided USB-A to USB-C cable. I believe the packaging said this is a 10-foot cable. It's really thick and has that fabric feel to it. Nothing under the insert. There's what I was looking for. I'm assuming this is the charging base. I hadn't actually looked at images of it or anything, but I was kind of expecting it to be bigger, like a full-size stand. I do really love that they did this. This is the wireless dongle, and it stores in the charging base, so that's one less thing to keep up with. And then finally, we've got the controller here with plastic to protect it. And they also have foam rings on the thumbsticks to protect those, which I love. So without the RGB lighting on, this controller has a super blacked out look. The V1 doesn't have any RGB at all, so that's one of the major differences between the V3 and the V1. Also, the V1 doesn't have these two extra top buttons. These feel pretty good, though they're a little bit strange. They're small and narrow, but the placement seems good. Kind of the same initial impression of the back buttons. The placement feels good, and the buttons themselves feel just okay. They feel kind of hollow and, I don't know, maybe cheap. They are just plastic. I do like the configuration though. I prefer 4-button setups that you can easily use with just one finger, and these seem like they're going to be good for that. We also have 3-way trigger locks, so in the first position they're a full pull, second position is a half pull, and then third position is a short pull. Unfortunately, these aren't mechanical trigger stops, so you don't get the instant mouse click triggers in the third position. They're not bad, but they don't cut out quite as much as I would want, really. We've got mechanical face buttons, both A, B, X, Y, and D-pad, and the shoulder buttons are also mechanical. They feel and sound nice, though there's like no resistance to the shoulder buttons, so it feels a little strange. Fortunately, we do have Hall effect thumbsticks, which is great. Additionally though, the OPS V3 has a pretty unique feature with the thumbsticks. They have adjustable height, and I'm not talking about interchangeable thumbsticks. You can see here they're telescopic, and they have 3 different lock settings. So you twist them clockwise and they will lock into place. If you twist again, you'll get the next setting, and if you twist again, you'll be back to the original setting. This is not available on the OPS V1, it's only on the OPS V3. One more feature that's exclusive to the V3 is this coating that's on the bottom front of the grips and wraps around to cover the back of the grips. They specifically call this rubberized coating, but it feels kind of weird. It's kind of rough instead of soft. It does seem to provide good grip, but it's definitely not my favorite. The V1 and V3 both come with an integrated battery. The V1 is 550 milliamp and the V3 is 1200, but the V1 also doesn't come with this charging dock and isn't compatible with it, so you can't purchase it separately. The dock and controller have an indicator light to show that it's charging, and both will be green when it's fully charged. That covers the features, so we're going to jump over to the app and look at customization. This is the app we're looking for, PowerA Gamer HQ. It's free on the Microsoft Store, and I think also available on the Xbox, but of course you'd have to have one of their Xbox licensed controllers for that. The app has terrible reviews, so we'll see how this goes. So the app doesn't recognize the OPS V3 as a PowerA controller. The controller vibrates when you hold Y to identify, but nothing actually happens. And you can't select anything with mouse input. Hitting A on the controller works at least. But there's not a ton you can do here. I assume there would be a lot more if the app actually knew what controller we were using. It looks like we can adjust dead zones, so that's good. We can test standard button inputs, test the sound. Is this another tab on the left here? Hold start and select to go back. No, there's not another tab. We can just go back to controller select again. Hi, slightly older Old Man Rob here, as I spent some time searching, and I eventually found this app, which is the PowerA Battle Dragon app, which is absolutely not the app that's supposed to be used for this controller, but if we click identify in this app, it does know what controller we have. That said, we can't, actually select it. What we can do is say, sure, this is the Battle Dragon Advance, which based on everything I can find online is an unreleased controller that's somewhere between the OPS V3 and the OPS V1, basically. I have no idea if that's a controller that's supposed to come out or was supposed to come out, or if that's going to be the OPS V2 that for some reason they just didn't release at the same time as the V1 and V3. But if anybody watching does know, feel free to let me know down in the comments. Also, whatever you do, do not hit update here. I hit A instead of X and spent about 20 minutes thinking I had bricked a brand new controller because it took me that long to get it to power back on after I hit update and got an immediate error saying something went wrong. I do not know how I fixed it. I plugged it into several different USB ports, several different computers. I hooked it up to the Xbox through a Brick Accessories app. Eventually, somehow, it powered back on. So regardless of the fact that this isn't the app we're supposed to be using and the app doesn't actually know what controller this is, we do have a lot more customization options here. We can map the 4 rear buttons, which I've done, and it does save. Of note, you can only map buttons that are physically on the controller, so no keyboard inputs, unfortunately. I specifically don't use turbo buttons or settings, but if that's your thing, I did test it and it does work. The joystick settings are much more detailed in this app as well, much easier to set and test dead zones, and you can adjust the response curve. It's not as detailed as a lot of third-party controller apps, but it's much better than the Gamer HQ app at least. The biggest issue I currently have is that this page doesn't function with the OPS V3. You can change what trigger position you're using, but it doesn't save, so no matter what, on the test page, it will not register a full input if you have the trigger stops engaged. I've tried it multiple times, but when you leave this page and come back, it's always reset to the first position. There is a recalibration option, which I guess could potentially solve that problem, but honestly, I wasn't willing to risk it since I know this app isn't actually supposed to be set up for this controller, and the calibration instructions are very specific. I'm afraid it might actually mess something up and make the controller unusable. So there are a couple of big things we can't do in this app. We can't program the 2 additional shoulder or claw grip buttons, since apparently the fictional Battle Dragon Pro controller doesn't have those, and we can't customize the RGB lighting. Fortunately, both of those things can be done on the fly from the controller, as can back button mapping and turbo settings, so in theory you can kind of get away with not using the app at all if necessary. There are 2 buttons on the back of the controller just below the charging contact points. The top one is labeled Program, and if you hold that button for a couple of seconds, the home button will start flashing to let you know you're in program mode. Press the button you're wanting to map somewhere, then press the button you want to map it to. The home button will stop flashing, then you can repeat the process to map any additional buttons. From my testing, you can only remap the additional buttons, so the 4 back buttons and the 2 claw buttons. You can't remap face buttons or shoulder buttons or triggers as far as I can tell. The button below the program button is the RGB button. If you hold it for a couple of seconds, the controller enters RGB programming mode. There's a lot of customization you can do here. The RGB is split into 4 quadrants. The first one is the left side, and that's the outside LED strip that runs from the center top to the center bottom of the controller. The second quadrant is the right side, same thing, from top to bottom. The third is the left stick and the ABXY buttons, and the fourth is the D-pad and the right stick. So the outer RGB sections are divided left and right, but the inner sections are divided top and bottom instead. While you're on a section, you can use ABXY buttons to change the color, and pressing one of the buttons multiple times cycles through 6 different colors or shades of colors for each button. Pressing up or down on the D-pad changes the brightness for the section you're on, and pressing left on the D-pad changes the pattern between static, breathing, or cycling. Pressing select changes the speed of the pattern, and pressing the RGB button turns the RGB off for the section you're currently on. There might be more, but if so, I've already forgotten it, and regardless, that's more than enough light customization for me, so I'm moving on now. So over here in Gamepad LA, we're going to test polling rates for wired, wireless, and Bluetooth, and we'll start with wired. The controller is showing up correctly as the OPS V3 Pro, so that's a good start. PowerA says this controller is 1000 Hz in wired mode, so we're going to start big with 6000 inputs. I'm having my doubts. That's not looking like 1000 Hz to me. Yeah, this is registering as 500 Hz, though the average is almost 6. Average latency of 1.72 milliseconds. We'll go ahead and run it one more time just to be sure. I'm just going to do 2000 inputs this time because I'm not expecting anything to change. Let's get crazy and use the right stick. I don't think I've ever done that before. Yep, same. 500 Hz, though the actual average is 581. Average latency is exactly the same at 1.72 milliseconds. This is pretty disappointing, really, since PowerA lists the specs on their website and they say the controller has 1000 Hz polling rate in wired mode and 500 in wireless. I'm going to hazard a guess that the wireless won't be accurate either. So we're in wireless mode here, and the controller still shows up correctly as the OPS V3 Pro. I'm just going to do 2000 inputs here to start. I'm not expecting this to be crazy fast. And it's not. So, lied to again. In wireless mode, we have a 250 Hz polling rate with average just a little above that. Latency at 3.81 milliseconds. The jitter is pretty high, much higher than it was in wired mode. Since we're already here, we'll go ahead and test the Bluetooth mode as well. In Bluetooth, it just shows up as a generic controller in Gamepad LA. And we'll just do 2000 inputs for Bluetooth. Unfortunately, 2000 inputs still took long enough for me to go make a sandwich, catch the end of the football game, and read War and Peace. All one-handed, of course, but when I came back, this test was still going. What's the polling rate, you ask? Really f***ing slow is the answer. Once the numbers finally pop up on screen here, you're going to see that Bluetooth mode is showing max polling rate of 125 Hz, but average was about 81 Hz with very low stability, extremely high jitter, an average latency of over 12 seconds, and a max latency of almost 34 seconds. Do not use this controller in Bluetooth mode. Jumping over to Gamepad Tester, we can see here that unfortunately we're not getting a consistent resting value for either thumbstick. This is with the inner dead zone set to 0, and ideally we'd like to see them snap back to the same reading consistently, but that's just not the case here. That said, the variance is pretty low, so I'll be putting some time in on the controller before I actually adjust dead zones in the app to see if this variance actually results in any stick drift. We'll also go ahead and test circularity here, and we're getting an average of about 11% error on the left thumbstick. Right thumbstick is more like 12, and that's pretty average. I'm going to try to avoid explaining this in every single video I post, but error doesn't really mean error. These thumbsticks are just fine. Okay, conclusions. The polling rate issue is concerning. I tested this thing 100 times on 3 different PCs with like 8 different USB cables. Exactly twice I got a result like this, showing a max polling rate of 1000 Hz, but average rate of just over 600. So either this is a really slow 1000 Hz polling rate or a really fast 500 Hz. It's really weird that PowerA would just straight up lie about it on the product spec page, so I wonder if this is something that'll get addressed in a future update. That, of course, leads to the other major issue with this controller, which is that the app currently doesn't support the V3 Pro. You can kind of get it working in the Battle Dragon app, which doesn't appear to be the app you're supposed to use, but the controller isn't recognized at all in the Gamer HQ app. I do find this to be completely unacceptable. It's not like I got my hands on this thing early. I ordered from Amazon, the controller is officially out, and the software should support the controller at launch, period. Both of these issues are pretty major, so it might be a good reason to pass on the OPS V3 for most people, but I gotta say, I actually really like this controller, like much more than I thought I would. I've been using it in game all week, and it's maybe my second favorite controller to use right now, and that's just behind the god king of controllers that is the Vader 4 Pro. The first big thing I want to say is that I absolutely love the button layout. I've discovered that the top rear buttons are a little higher than I would typically want, but over the course of a few days I actually changed to using the bottom set of rear buttons as my main buttons and just slide my middle finger up to hit the top button. That required some new muscle memory development, but it feels fantastic now. The claw grip buttons are the best I've ever used, and that's not hyperbole. The reason these are typically referred to as claw grip buttons are because they're designed for people who play claw, which I do not. When controllers include these, the question is always how accessible will they be if you're using the controller in a standard grip. You remember in the beginning of the video when I said these things are small and narrow and kind of weird? Well, they also stick up slightly higher than the shoulder and trigger buttons, so actuating these unintentionally isn't an issue at all, and after a couple of games I had zero issues avoiding unintentional presses of the shoulder buttons when going for these. They're actually very usable, which is more than you can say for the majority of 5th and 6th button layouts. Even the almighty Vader 4 has the 2 extra buttons on the face of the controller, which kind of defeats the purpose, because the idea of additional programmable buttons is mostly to avoid having to use the face buttons in the first place. I also like everything about the thumbsticks. They have a bit more tension than, say, a standard Xbox Series controller, and while that's not nearly as nice as having adjustable tension, they still feel very good in game. I said I would let you know after testing, and I did have to adjust my dead zones to 1% on the left and 2% on the right to eliminate any stick drift in game. I know people are going to comment that you shouldn't have to do that with Hall Effect sticks, but in the short time that Hall Effect technology has been popular, I've owned, I think, 11 controllers with Hall Effect sticks, and I've yet to have a single one that had no variance with the dead zone set to 0 in their respective apps. I also do like the adjustable height option, although as you can see I still ended up using a Control Freak. The thumbsticks have decent grip, especially around the edges, but I just prefer to have extra grip and a wider head on the right stick, so I'm using a medium rise Freak with the thumbstick set to the second height, and it feels just about right. Back to the polling rate issue, I also have to say that this controller feels responsive and really good in game, much better than I expected. Keep in mind this is playing wired. I don't spend any significant amount of time playing wireless with any controller. It's definitely not 1000 Hz, but at the same time, the difference between 500 and 1000 Hz is 1 millisecond of latency, and in testing the OPS V3 is getting almost 600 Hz, so about 1.7-ish milliseconds of latency, and something like the Vader 4 Pro, for example, is getting a little under 1000, so a little over 1 millisecond, so yeah. My YouTube channel name is not a gimmick. I'm objectively old in terms of the gaming scene, so while some of you 14-year-old super sweats out there with a belly full of G Fuel and a heart full of dreams of competitive esports dominance will be able to differentiate between that roughly half a millisecond of latency difference, my old ass can't. What this controller really leaves me wondering about is the upcoming PowerA Fusion Pro Wireless, which appears to be an officially licensed Xbox wireless controller with basically the same features as the OPS V3 and a more artistic, I guess, take on the RGB. My biggest concern with that is the info page for it doesn't say anything about polling rates, and since they just straight up lied about the polling rates for this controller, I kind of have some doubts. If it's at least 250 Hz wireless on the Xbox and has the same features as the OPS V3, I'll almost certainly prefer that to something like the Wolverine V3 Pro, but if it's 125 Hz, it's just a waste of $150, just like the Elite Series 2 is a waste of $180. So you guys let me know, are you interested in the Fusion Pro wireless? If so, and if this video gets a little traction, I'll go ahead and order one for review, and we can all cross our fingers together for a 500 or 1000 Hz polling rate. I hope this video helped you out, and if so, please subscribe if you haven't already. Likes and comments are also appreciated, and I'll try my best to react and respond to all comments. I'll be doing more reviews regularly, so I hope to see you back here again soon. Thanks for watching.